Brianna Joy Gray brought on Center for American Progress, ex-Center for American Progress worker, current Bernie Sanders foreign policy advisor, which makes a lot of sense as to why Bernie's foreign policy is shite, Matt Duss. And by the way, I don't think you put it in here, but Max Blumenthal once asked him a question and he miserably failed.
No, the audio wasn't great, you know what I'm saying? But I did find something. Alex Rubenstein immediately sent me a different tweet that we were able to put up in there. Thank you, Alex, of course. And yeah, I mean, fam, I just want to reiterate too as well, when you say we're going back, we are going back. We've talked about this stuff for a long, long time. Now it's come to fruition today. But everything that's happening today and everything we're going to talk about, and fam left put together a nice folder to lay it out for you guys, what's going on. So just, you know, we've talked about it. It's going to happen. And, you know, it's been happening for years. And that's why we are where we're at today.
So fam, take it away.
Let's do it. Trey Wright. Hey, fam. Love you all. Keep speaking truth and fuck the cryberry cuck children that whine at the two of you for no reason. Thank you, Bubba. Because when you show us the love, it makes it all worthwhile. Guys, it's Friday. That's usually the day when everybody's out kicking it, doing something else. Hit the like button, hit the share button, Rokfin, YouTube's. Let's go. Let's get rolling. So, fam, I think it's important to put this out there because this is kind of the progressive mindset. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, fam, the one person we said was the worst on Bernie Sanders' staff was Matt Duss, the foreign policy advisor from Center for American Progress. True or false?
I think we did say it was him, and I think a close second was Faz because he came from the same contingent of the Center for American Progress. In fact, most of his staff did. The only people that we liked at that time were David Serrata, Brianna Joy Gray, and literally nobody else. I'm Nina Turner. That was it. Like everybody else was like tainted in some way or another. And so, and now nobody's really left. I mean, God, okay. It's so much to happen in such a short amount of time. But let's go ahead, because I mean, I'm not against you interviewing people adversarially, people like this, adversarially. Like, okay, bring out Matt Duss and like have a conversation with him, ask him, you know, questions that put him in a bind.
Yeah.
But this was more of a discussion and a very soft type of interview.
Yes.
From what I saw. So that was my issue with it. Wasn't there anybody else that you could have picked to discuss Ukraine, Russia that wasn't Matt Duss? I mean, I'm not going to police who you bring on, but I am going to criticize it if it's not, you know, if you're not pushing back at the bullshit he's saying, because he said a bunch of bullshit. So, I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, fam, you know, it also speaks volume. The two things is, number one, Matt Duss wouldn't take an interview where he'd get challenged anyways right now. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that if the Gray Zone asked Matt Duss to take an interview with any member of the Gray Zone that he would take that right now. I firmly believe that. So he understood it was a safe space. And I think it's important to point out that Matt Duss was the progressive choice. I mean, this is where we've come to. And it also speaks volume, fam, because when you look at this interview and you watch this interview, you know, and I don't want to take anything away from Brianna Joy Gray, but it's not her area. It's not her wheelhouse. But more importantly, that's why we started the show. We've been talking foreign policy since day one. Progressives don't pay attention to foreign policy. They don't understand what's going on. Americans don't pay attention to foreign policy. They don't know what's going on. Like, I literally saw a progressive activist in the streets with, you know, like standing by, you know, Ukrainians in Russia. Like, I stand by Ukrainians. Like, are you fucking kidding me? And I'm not saying you shouldn't stand by anybody who's getting innocent people who are getting bombed. We never want to see that. But where were you for 8 years while people were getting shelled on a regular basis in the Donbass? And I think we're going to break it down. This interview is important to break down because we have to understand. I'm going to take the time to say, hey, progressives out there, hey, leftists, let's learn about foreign policy, because a lot of you people out there who are saying stuff today, once you get all the information in a couple weeks, maybe a couple days, might be a couple months for some of you, you're going to have a different stance on what's going on once you know the facts, because it's easy to understand if you understand everything that's been going on and involved. We've done everything short of going there. So I think that's the next step for us, because we've been talking about this shit since day one, fam. We've been talking about this shit. So,
fam, I have my Russian hat ready. So let's go.
Let's do it. Okay, so let's play the first one where Bree pretty much asked Matt to give us how all this got started. And I want you to pay attention, number one, where every single neocon, neo-lib, warmongering establishment person starts it off from. They started off from an American CIA imperialist point of view. They might start from Crimea saying it was annexed, but not. But just listen to Matt Duss. And Bree is pretty open, fam, that she wants to make a show where she's baby stepping the situation. But this is not probably the first guest you want to get on there for that, you know?
Right.
Yeah. I know there's been a lot of commentary about this, but my feeling often is that the way that foreign policy in particular is talked about excludes a lot of folks from the conversation who haven't been following it for a long time. And I want this to kind of be baby's first Ukrainian episode. So could you help set the scene of why we are in this conflict to begin with?
Sure. I mean, it's always with situations like this, when you want to appreciate and respect the amount of kind of complexity and nuance, it's hard to know how far to go back. So, people will criticize whatever choice they make. So let's just say that it's clear that for many years that Russia and Vladimir Putin in particular have, opposed kind of Ukraine's tilt toward Europe, toward the West, to talk about Ukraine joining NATO. At the same time, this is not something that is necessarily unique to Putin. And I think there are actually valid questions with how much this actually plays into Putin's concerns. I mean, I think he wrote a piece last year, and in his rambling speech that he gave just yesterday, justifying the latest invasion of Ukraine, the NATO expansion. And again, just for listeners, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, founded in the wake of World War II, specifically as a U.S.-Europe military alliance to confront and oppose Soviet expansion. And that has expanded since the collapse of the Cold War to include a number of former Soviet countries. And that's been an issue for leaders beyond just Putin. I mean, American officials themselves have acknowledged that this is a very, very touchy political issue for Russians for obvious reasons. But as far as how big a role that plays in Putin's own concerns, I think it was one part, but only one part in the kind of vast sort of revisionist history that he laid out in the speech that he gave justifying the invasion. And I would encourage folks to read that speech. Actually, I think Max Fisher in the New York Times had a really good kind of analysis piece by piece of that speech, because it was a pretty, it's not exactly shocking, but it was another step in terms of completely revising or just completely denying Ukraine's existence as an independent state, denying Ukrainian culture as a real thing, denying the Ukrainian people as a separate people, saying that this is just one civilization, which of course means a Russian domination.
Pam, do you want to go and start off with that, with how Matt Duss is kind of setting the scene? Because, I like the way he just gives a disclaimer. People are going to criticize me anyways. Yeah, no shit, Matt Duss. Of course we're going to criticize you because we know what you're going to say. But if you'd like to start off, I'll piggyback off that, because I also, there's so many things. Go ahead, fam.
It's hard to say where to start. I mean, from the beginning, the progressives frame this, the way they feed this to progressives is you are discounting Ukraine and the sovereignty of Ukraine. The CIA once said one of the ways to get the left to join them was to go through the anarchist mentality. Now, real anarchists, are different than Twitter anarchists, but there are a lot of people that call themselves anarchists and these communists and socialists. And what they do is they say, oh, we have to recognize the sovereignty and the independence of these people. And they completely obfuscate everything else, completely dismiss the history, the how we got here, the historical context, which is why we're going to go into it. And he completely acts like this is an attempt by Putin to take over Ukraine, to annex Ukraine. And this is what the narrative you'll be hearing from these people. Putin is trying to create the Russian Empire again. And these people aren't going to be independent anymore, which is completely contradictory because he literally just recognized the Donetsk and the Luhansk region, right? And then and it just doesn't make any sense. He's literally going in there because he was asked from this sector of the population that is ethnically Russian and that has been under complete bombardment and attack for the last 8 years. He's not talking about any of that. He's calling it revisionist history when Putin is saying these are the reasons why. He's not talking about the violation of the Minsk treaty. He's not talking about NATO's expansion eastward, where they said they weren't going to expand and they have continued expanding beyond the territories. I mean, you can see that. I don't know if I put it in there. I might add it in there, but it's like a map, and you can see how NATO has expanded in the last century. And so, I mean, it's very obvious. He's saying a lot of lies, but he's kind of wrapping these lies in a lot of just garbled, U.S. State Department jargon in order for people to like feed it to.
I know there's been a lot of commentary
the sector of Brianna Joy Gray's audience, because he knows these people are going to be like, yeah, you're right. We need to recognize and stand with the Ukrainian people. We need to stand with all people who want sovereignty. I'm a communist and Putin isn't a communist. He's a right winger. So you know what? I'm going to stand with the people demanding sovereignty from this oligarch. He knows exactly who he's talking to.
Yeah. Fam, Putin, he hates gays, and you know that. But, I also listen to the, not just what's being said, but how it's being said, because it's like this technique that these, when you want to fool the progressives, you kind of half-ass, acknowledge and address it. It's a very complicated situation over here, but, I'm saying we are addressing it. However, and it's always that pivot, and I don't know why that a lot of progressives kind of take that on face value and go like, well, they understand it, but the situation's much more complicated. Matt kind of laid it out, and then you continue to make sure you hit the demonizing points. Putin wants the Soviet expansion, he's trying to hurt their culture and their ethnicity and everything. And in actuality, what Putin is trying to do, he's trying to protect it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, I mean, that's just
30%. Yeah, we can get to the next clip, but 30% of the people in that region are Russian. So you can't, they're trying to erase the Ukrainian culture. What are you talking about? There are a lot of people who are still, who wanted in 2014, who voted for I'll remember his name in a second, but who voted for the pro-Russian democratically elected leader, and that in the region it was about 90% of people, and they completely dismissed that. So
let's get to the second clip over here, fams.
So if you go back to 2014, you had in what is now acknowledged as a Russian invasion of eastern Ukraine, in the region known as Donbass. This is the region in eastern Ukraine that contains the two provinces or oblasts that Russian forces or Russian affiliated forces occupied since 2014, and that conflict was basically frozen until about a year ago, when Russia slowly began to mass its forces on essentially three sides of Ukraine, including putting forces in Belarus, blockading it by the sea to the south, and putting what we have now close to 170,000 Russian troops on three sides. And as of yesterday, those troops have now gone into those regions in eastern Ukraine. The legal pretext given by Putin and by the Russian government is that we recognize the independence of these regions, and we are now acting on the basis of our own laws, which permits us to act in defense of Russian citizens in these independent regions. So that's where we are right now.
I like the way he kind of as we know, as we acknowledge now that in 2014 it was an invasion by the Russians. It's, and that's the part that kind of blows my mind. You're like, wait a second, for the last 2 days, Russia just spanked the shit out of Ukraine. It let them know all around the country, quickly, fast. We see footage of Ukrainian soldiers like, oh, I ain't fucking around with this. What do you want me to sign? Put me in zip ties and just get me out of here. I comply. But they want you to believe, Matt wants you to believe, well, Putin just had a little invasion in 2014, just to last for 8 years before we said, okay, now we're not playing around. I mean, it's just asinine. We all know what's going on, and I like the way he was also kind of finger pointing to the other enemies. He made sure he mentioned Belarus in the whole situation. They just set up this parameter, fam. And here's the thing. Bree is not educated enough in this situation and on this topic to question, well, wait a second, wasn't there a regime change sponsored by the West in 2014? You don't know that to push back. So you set this parameters, this jumping off point, and I'm going to finish it real quick. This jumping off point where it's just, you can set sail on a whole bunch of imaginary bullshit that doesn't even make sense because you're not even starting off from the right point.
No, you can continue. All I was going to say was his name was Viktor Yanukovych. That was
Yanukovych,
the man that was ousted with the help of the U.S. And of course the neo-Nazi regimes. And you have the Guardian reminder right here, right? Viktor Yanukovych.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing, is that a lot of people go, and I always say this scenario, like they're like, Putin acted with a lot of restraint. These are ethnic speaking Russians that are now being bombed by the new government that was a regime change that they didn't want to acknowledge because they didn't think it was the right thing. They thought it was they're not going to acknowledge it. A lot of, can you imagine citizens, and I talked about this with Mark Sloboda, and that's why I even put up, even the fucking old Ukrainian president was like, dude, Putin, get involved. What are you doing? Don't let these people get slaughtered here. And Putin acted with a lot of restraint. And that's why I think just as of a couple of days ago, he's not playing anymore. We said this before. It's once the Biden administration took over, this is a different Russian Federation right now. They're not going to be as passive as they were in 2014. And a lot of citizens in Russia were mad at Putin for not acting right away. Like, let's go. Come on. Don't let these people get slaughtered here. And that's something that's just like kind of like, it's never, ever mentioned, because if it happened here in America, if there were some Americans that were living just north of the American border on the southern border of Canada, I mean, like they were Americans, they would say, what about, not what about. They said that football was better than hockey. They're like Americans that are living in Canada and they were there on the border. And if Putin, had some people overthrow the Trudeau government in Canada and start bombing those Americans that were in Canada.
Can you imagine?
For 8 fucking years. Can you imagine the Americans going, Biden, what are you doing? They're bombing Americans in Canada with the new government that was overthrown. It would have never lasted that long. So when we say that Putin acted with a lot of restraint while people are going, he's going crazy. Like, no, you don't know the situation. He's not starting a war. He's ending it.
Yes, exactly, fam. Next clip.
Mike's on, or?
That's where we are right now.
Thank you. That's helpful. So my first question is, if the invasion really happened in 2014, I was reflecting on whether or not the kind of discourse we're having now about World War III existed back then. And there was some of it, but I don't recall it being at quite the fever pitch it is right now. To what do you attribute that?
I mean, I think it's a couple things. One is it was a much smaller operation back then. I mean, the presence of, again, 170,000 troops and artillery and armored tanks, etc., massing on the borders.
And just for context, that's something like, 75% of Russia's standing army? It's significant, right?
It's hugely significant. That's a good question. I'm not sure of the percentage, but this is the biggest mobilization of Russian military forces that we've seen since the Afghanistan invasion back in the late 70s. So it is very big. It's the biggest one in 40 years. I think that is very significant. In 2014, the operation was different. You had what were called at the time little green men, who were basically, military contractors, essentially militias, which there's some evidence were acting at the behest, under the command, or at least closely associated with the Russian government. But there was at least a level of deniability. That was the whole point, was Putin decided to act in a way that there was a level of deniability about what was really happening. And of course, he's trying that to some extent now by claiming that there are Ukrainian attacks on these regions. They've used the word genocide. There's zero evidence any of that is going on. I mean, I think the idea that the Ukrainians would seek to provoke the Russian forces with 170,000 Russian troops massed at their border kind of beggars belief. But those are the claims that Putin is making. But I think this is a much, much more overt action than we saw in 2014, with a much larger military force. And I think that leads to some of this rhetoric you're talking about.
Bam.
You're going to tell me that there is no evidence that these people have been shelled, bombed, and literally murdered for the last 8 years. There's plenty of evidence, and we're going to show you the plenty of evidence. It's just not put out by the mainstream media and the State Department talking heads like Matt Duss, who bring Anna Joy Gray's platform. You know what irritates me, Pasta? when we bring Magnus on the show, when we bring a libertarian on the show, because that's essentially, Magnus is like more of like an anarchist libertarian type of guy. People like come at us. How dare you platform this fash, blah, blah, blah. How dare you platform a State Department talking head warmonger and not adversarially go after him? I don't understand. If you're not educated on the subject, then you shouldn't do it. Yeah. Because then they're doing a disservice to your audience, especially a person that has a vast audience. And then, of course, you're perpetuating these myths, these lies that are completely on the side of empire and not on the side of the people and not on the side of anything that you remotely preach to be about, like any sort of progressive value, any sort of anti-war, anti-imperialist rhetoric. And all that shit goes out the window now. When you bring people like Matt Duss in, who's completely lying about this entire situation, and it's so infuriating to me. Like, there are so many other people. And Niko said it as much. You could have brought anybody else, dude. Like, so many other people. You're bringing in Matt Duss, you might as well bring in a member of the Azov battalion. I mean, these people, they're so like focused on the right winger, the Nazi, the Trump supporter, and yet they don't equate the same warmongering neocon voices that they bring on their own shows without any pushback. It's just really...
Well, it was like the minor league to what MSNBC did. MSNBC will be back with John Bolton.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean,
we'll be back with Matt Duss.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy. And that also kind of disturbed me too, as well, is that the point where Bree stopped to make a point was kind of a Western media talking point. Well, this is the biggest massive amounts of troops moved to the border now. Now, can you clarify that? Let me justify why it's different now. Let me talk about, why things are happening now. And that, I mean, saying that there is no evidence is ridiculous. Let's just take a look. And listen, I spent a couple hours yesterday looking at videos in Donetsk. Look at this over here, right here. This is the airport right now. And it's just, take a look. So, I mean, this is in the Donbass, guys.
So, back in the airport territory, not as close as it was before, admittedly, because the game has changed here at Donetsk Airport. The last time I was here, in fact, was at the end of October, and at that time was coming 2 or 3 times a week. I was actually getting right to the positions by the old terminal, which at that time was impassable. And then that time things became kind of static here, there wasn't movement, so went to other positions for a few weeks, and then had intended to come back in November, but then of course I get injured at the end of November, and now it's almost 2 months, and things have definitely changed here. We've now got the Battalion Vostok, as we reported at the start of November. The Battalion Vostok, the Vostok Battalion, we're going to be sent here. Givy Somali Battalion left. We've still got Motorola's Sparta Battalion here, but it's predominantly under the control of the Vostok Battalion. And they basically put in place a protocol, so there's a procedure to get in, and so even, for example, the positions where we were, there's no access permitted there, no access at all. The old terminal is under the control of the Vostok Battalion, Motorola's Battalion, they're working together. But they say that that's extremely dangerous, that's still mined, and it's impassable. So where we are is near, we're all around here, destroyed aircraft, and obviously the state of the airport itself, a $750 million airport, is in a state of complete destruction all around. You can see here, it's a debris and fuselage of airplanes, which gives you an idea of what's further.
Fam, did you see that airport? That was the international airport they had there. You know what I'm saying? Like, planes would go out on a regular basis. It's just blown to smithereens. So what are you telling me that there's no fucking evidence of shit going on over there? I mean, what do you want us to believe, that the Russians did that to the people they're now trying to liberate? I don't know what your explanation is going to be about these things. That's their international airport. You can see commercial airliners all blown up. So Matt Duss is just straight out lying, and at no point does Bree make any significant pushback whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, that says it all.
Yeah, and you made a tweet about this the other day. This next clip, once again, do imperialism. You know, I mean, let's.
Yeah.
Hey, here we go.
I know Putin is doing imperialism. I'm like, what? What do you mean? But you can't say shit like that. Like, you have to be specific.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the argument that this is an area of Ukraine where there are people who have, cultural identity affiliation with Russia. Obviously, the way that we do borders and do colonialism and do imperialism mean that there are all kinds of people living all across different borders who have different affiliations like that. And that there are separatists in the region, whether or not they're being informed, propagandized, boosted by Russia, who would prefer a different kind of national affiliation. And that there is a who started it conversation going on between, whether or not you would attribute it to the separatists throwing the first punch or Ukrainians throwing the first punch.
I mean, I think what you said about, yes, there exactly as you said, in the eastern regions, there are people who consider themselves perhaps more Russian than Ukrainian. They are Russian speakers. There are also people who are Russian speakers who are, very much a part of Ukraine, want to continue being part of Ukraine. They speak Ukrainian as well as Russian. And the farther you get west, the kind of, I think the Ukrainian culture asserts itself a bit more. But as you said as well, this is not unique. I mean, we have a lot of countries around the world, borders, particularly in Europe. Let's remember, borders were drawn with every few weeks through, the late, 19th century and into the 20th. But, the way to handle that is obviously not through an invasion. The way to do that is to promote kind of a pluralistic democracy, a government that represents its own people or all of its people. I would just add that using this excuse of, we are acting to protect our ethnic brothers and sisters is a very familiar kind of excuse that's offered throughout history, and rarely truthfully and rarely ends up well.
But the United States can constantly use the excuse of trying to care about X, Y, Z minority while simultaneously ignoring the minorities in other countries like Somalia, like Palestine, like Yemen. Okay, so all of a sudden, the minorities, the Russian and ethnic and Slovak people that were getting shelled for the last 8 years where nobody said two shits because Vladimir Putin didn't do anything. I mean, he the moment he pushes back against U.S. imperialism is the moment then people start caring about these people suddenly that they didn't even know, they couldn't even fucking point to Ukraine on a map. But yet all of a sudden now, oh my gosh, yes, we have to stand with Ukraine. The hypocrisy and the gaslighting of the empire is just disgusting.
Yeah. And to me, Matt Duss is no different than Colin Powell, just a little bit different, with a little bit more fluffier, nicer words for the buzzwords that the progressives
Which
like
is
to hear.
worse.
You know what I'm saying? It is worse because it's more cryptic, it's more dangerous, it's more sinister, and we get that. But the thing I really want to, since we all laid that out, and you can see what he's saying, he'll justify anything with this just fucking, he'll say a lot, but won't fucking mean anything. But the thing I really want to point out was in the beginning, what I think the new battle cry or the new place where a lot of progressives are putting their flags is we can be critical of when Putin does imperialism and when America does imperialism at the same time. There's certain people, I also quote tweeted somebody doing that. That's the new kind of virtue signaling.
We'll talk about that.
You could be critical of both sides. Any type of bombing is awful. That's where they're at now. And it's they don't listen. I don't want to see anybody be fucking bombed. But at the end of the day, we understand what Putin's doing because we've seen what's unfolded over the last 8 years there. And none of this would have happened if in 2014, Steve and I talked about that on the morning show the other day. Maybe go back to 2004, maybe go back to 1991. But you got to understand what's going on, the influence. What should be said by progressives who do their homework is, bottom line, we don't need to be over there. Get the fudge out. Stop messing around. Stop interfering and involving yourselves. But we know it's more about, NATO getting money for, weapons, the military-industrial complex, the taking of resources. That's what it's all about. That's what our foreign policy is about. That's what our imperialism is about. That's what our intervention is about. It's about raping resources, global hegemony, and we're never going to stop. But this kind of point that Bree is trying to make, and I think a lot of people, they feel, virtuous about it. It's really just a bullshit point. It's really that you could be critical of both sides and bullshit, and we should ask for Putin to stop as well. I mean, I saw some actress online going, Putin, if I was your mother, I was just born too late. Like trying to contact with Putin's emotional side, the mad maniac that the Western media's put him out to be. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. You can just go ahead and play the next clip because I mean, I would say the same thing you said. We'll talk more about the Putin is doing imperialism later.
It seems like this is in some ways related to the factions that have emerged on the left with approach to this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So there is one faction that I don't want to mischaracterize anybody. I mean, there's kind of like ridiculous versions of each faction, I would say, but there is a group that's being accused of not sufficiently recognizing that what Russia is doing is imperialism too, because they are overly invested or so blinded by their distaste for American imperialism that they might go too far in saying that Russia is doing absolutely nothing wrong because they don't want that to become a pretext for America becoming overly involved.
Yeah.
And whether or not you credit aspects of that argument, I think has something to do with these questions around self-determination and how we should respond to a group of people's articulation of wanting to identify nationally differently, putting aside the question of how widespread that desire is and whether or not it's, propagandized or motivated by other things and stuff like that. And I wonder, if you've thought at all about that bigger picture question, because it does seem to be at the root of so many of the foreign policy conflicts that
I think we should just roll right into the next video. I think I might have made a mistake not piecing them together but done them by accident because, once again, I said like she's framing the argument or the debate or the discussion as if like we shouldn't we shouldn't hold Russia. We shouldn't just endlessly bow down to what Putin's doing because it's a dangerous point that we can once again be critical of both sides, and that's what we should be doing. And you think that might be what we should be doing because you don't understand the whole picture. You don't understand the whole story. And there's only one answer. I said it before, and we'll probably say it again a couple times this show. Go ahead and do the next clip.
that end up coming up on this show.
Yeah, no, and let me just say, I'm aware of, the kind of tendencies you're talking about. Certainly, I read them, I listen to them, agree or disagree, and I'll just say, I think, reflexive opposition to imperialism and suspicion of the American military-industrial complex and the foreign policy establishment is a good starting point. As a general rule, given especially what we've seen over the past 20 years, obviously even farther back, but especially over the past 20 years, as we've seen, human rights and liberating peoples and all the other stuff used as a way to draw in liberals and even progressives to support these disastrously destructive military interventions and adventures and misadventures around the world. But I think, the way I would approach it, and I think the way Senator Sanders has approached it, is focusing on this question of solidarity. What does it mean to kind of be in solidarity with the Ukrainian people in this case? What does it mean to be in solidarity with even perhaps people in eastern Ukraine, some of them who do want to be closer to Russia? I mean, again, haven't seen evidence myself that there is a large consensus in favor of that. Certainly, there's no large consensus in these regions to be caught in the middle of a new war that Russia is launching. But I think, looking at the anti-imperialist question, let's recognize the United States is guilty of a lot, but that should not prevent us from seeing what Russia is doing right now, which is imperialism, certainly in its own way. I think, again, referring to that speech that Putin gave yesterday, is overtly imperialism. I mean, he has made clear that he is not just trying to reconstruct the Soviet Union. He actually called the creation of Ukraine a product of Leninism and communism, and he was trying to reverse that. So he is actually reaching back into a much, much, much earlier conception of kind of Russian imperial nationalism. So I think it's, for those of us who want to, oppose this sort of violence wherever it arises, it's
Fam, tell me you're not a warmonger. Wait, let me do it right. Fam, tell me you're a warmonger while telling me that you're not a warmonger. Matt Duss, go ahead.
I mean, this is you notice how he put in Lenin and communism in order to. He knows exactly who he's talking to. He knows exactly that he can paint, and that's exactly what the next caveat is for these people. Is Putin is a right winger, and Trump likes Putin. Therefore, if you support Russia, you're a right winger. Notice also how he said you can stand in solidarity only with Ukrainian people or the people in Eastern Ukraine, but not. He didn't mention Russia. Because they're still pushing this neo-McCarthyite type of sentiment towards Russia. You can't have any solidarity with Russians. That's not allowed, right? While simultaneously trying to tell these progressives, who some of them fancy themselves some sort of communists, that Putin is anti-communist and all this other crap, like even as if that's relevant. Because even if that's the truth, is it relevant in this situation? No, but he knows. That's the bait and switch. Ooh, yeah, you get them this way. I must oppose Putin because I'm a communist and communism tells me. Like, it's just, he knows. And like, he's exploiting that very much so to get these people in line. And it's disgusting how he's like, even though throughout decades, especially in the last 20 years, we have seen, people go in there and trying to offer help. We've seen how that's been exploited. We need to stand in solidarity. And what Senator Sanders says, we're going to talk about what Sanders said. It's like solidarity, they've tarnished that word now because they're literally standing in solidarity
that's all they do.
With the neo-Nazis that the United States and the U.S. State Department, warmongers like George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and of course, the vast majority of the intelligence community. But please, by all means, stand in solidarity, progressives, with these people. Sure.
Yeah, and we've said this before. The people that are in control right now, especially when it comes to foreign policy, are the same people in 2014 that think that they're fighting against the old Soviet Union. They really are. Yep. And it's saying they can find a way to kind of twist words and, mention stand in solidarity. Like you said, that's now code for I don't know what the fuck I'm marching for. Just give me a reason to go stand out in the streets in solidarity.
Let me put a little flag on my Twitter.
Something,
a little Ukrainian
hieroglyphics
flag
and stuff like that. But these people, the Victoria Nulands, the Jake Sullivans, the Antony Blinkens, they're the same freaking people. The attaboy to Joe Biden that we'll get to eventually. These are the same people. And he just tells you right here, it's like this kind of like 1980s Cold War mentality they're still fighting against. We got to stop the Russian expansion and stuff. Guys, the wall came down a long time ago in East Germany. It's the Russian Federation. It's a totally different world. Just stop it. You're not fooling anybody. And like I said, when a lot of people come to fruition in a couple of weeks, when they get all the information, they're going to be like, oh, shit, man, maybe I shouldn't have supported neo-Nazis in the fucking Western Ukraine. They'll understand the term Banderite, right? They don't understand it now, but they'll understand it too in the future. So I don't think we have to play the last clip, fam. If you want to, we can, but it's more the same bullshit.
Yeah, I'm nauseous. So yeah.
Well, think about me having to watch this and clip this up right here. I didn't make it all the way through the whole thing. And normally I would have stopped in about 6 minutes, right? But I went, 40-something odd minutes deep into the thing. And it knocked me out cold. My head was spinning after that shit. But yeah.